When a civilization is conquered, what are the survivors supposed to do? After the Mongol armies swept into the Central Plains, a question arose that the conquerors had never faced before. What should they do with all these captured cities and farmland? The steppe had nothing like this, and the Mongols had never needed to manage such things. Someone offered a blunt solution. Since these cities would always rebel, why not kill everyone and turn the farmland into pasture? The steppe had no need for city walls or city people. In the middle of this discussion, a tall Khitan man stepped forward. He had a thick, flowing beard and a booming voice, standing out sharply among the Mongol warriors around him. He asked only one question: if you kill everyone, who will pay your taxes? The man who said this was neither Mongol nor Chinese. His name was Yelu Chucai, a descendant of the Khitan royal family, someone who understood what it meant to lose a nation better than anyone else in the room. Yelu Chucai was born into the remnants of the Liao dynasty's imperial lineage. The Liao had already been destroyed before he was born. He came into the world as a man without a homeland. The Jin dynasty had replaced the Liao and ruled the north. He grew up under the Jin, studied under the Jin, and served as a Jin official. Then the Jin itself was crushed by the Mongols, and he watched the country he had lived in for half his life collapse in flames. The ancestral homeland had vanished before he drew his first breath. The state he had built his life within crumbled before his eyes. Many would choose death, proving loyalty to the old order with their lives. Many would choose to withdraw from the world entirely. But Yelu Chucai chose a third path. He walked into the Mongol tent and became an advisor to the conquerors. When Genghis Khan first met him, the great Khan was struck by this towering figure with a beard that hung to his chest and called him the long-bearded one. Yelu Chucai was a master of Confucian scholarship, but also studied Buddhism, astronomy, and was particularly renowned for his skill in astrology. In steppe culture, celestial signs were seen as expressions of heaven's will, and this earned him his first measure of trust. He did not win over the conqueror through loyalty or valor. He entered the inner circle through knowledge. But entering the inner circle was one thing. Being able to change decisions at critical moments was another. While Genghis Khan lived, war remained the primary business of the Mongol Empire. Each time a city fell, the general's first instinct was massacre and plunder. This was steppe custom, where victors took everything and left nothing behind. All Yelu Chucai could do was pull back on the reins whenever he could. After the Mongol army captured Kaifeng, the former capital of the Jin dynasty, steppe convention would have permitted a general massacre. Yelu Chucai argued forcefully against it, pointing out that the city held vast numbers of skilled craftsmen, physicians, and scholars, people worth more alive than dead. In the end, a large number of these technical experts were spared. He could not stop all the killing, but he kept some of the people and some of the knowledge alive through the fire. Under Genghis Khan, however, war was always the main theme, and Yelu Chucai remained a marginal voice. What finally brought him to center stage was a transfer of power. In 1229, 2 years after Genghis Khan's death, his third son, Ogedei, formally took the throne. The new Khan faced a different situation from his father. The empire's territory was already enormous, but its operations depended entirely on wartime plunder. There was no stable source of income. Ogedei needed money, and he needed a sustainable fiscal system to fund even greater campaigns. This was the opportunity Yelu Chucai had been waiting years for. He proposed establishing tax offices, conducting population censuses, collecting household-based taxes, and having the state collect revenue directly. Replace plunder with institutions. Replace war spoils with tax revenue. But he quickly discovered he was not the only one trying to solve this problem. Two competing fiscal philosophies emerged at court. One camp, represented by a Central Asian fiscal official named Abd al-Rahman, advocated tax farming. a practice with deep roots in both Mongol and Central Asian traditions. Under this system, merchants would pay the court a large lump sum upfront, then collect from the population on their own terms, keeping whatever extra they could squeeze out. For the Mongol aristocracy, this was enormously attractive. No need to build a complex bureaucracy, no need to train tax officials, and the money arrived immediately. But Yelu Chucai saw where this model ended. Merchants, driven to recover their investment and turn a profit, would inevitably demand far more from the people than the court's official quota. Those who could not pay would flee. Flight would leave farmland abandoned. Abandoned farmland meant a smaller tax base the following year. Tax farming was like drinking poison to quench thirst. The first sip relieved the dryness, but every sip after accelerated the collapse. The evidence proved him right. In regions where tax farming had already been implemented, merchants squeezed so hard they took even the seed grain farmers needed for the next planting season. After paying their taxes, farmers had nothing left to sow. The following year, they could only abandon their fields and run. Stretches of land that should have been recovering from war turned back into wasteland. Except this time, the destruction came not from swords but from the system itself. The two fiscal lines clashed repeatedly at court. One represented the logic of fast returns. Yelu Chucai insisted on order and sustainability. In the end, with Ogedei's support, Yelu Chucai implemented a more regulated tax system, restricted massacres, and protected the agricultural population. Across much of northern China, production gradually recovered and fiscal revenue stabilized. By this point, Yelu Chucai had built a functioning fiscal system for the Mongol Empire. But one question always hung over him. Why would a Khitan man born without a homeland choose to build systems for the very conquerors who had destroyed the world around him? He did not remain loyal to the vanished Liao dynasty, nor did he rage against the fall of the Jin. He transferred his allegiance from any specific dynasty to the idea of order itself. For him, dynasties could change, but society could not be allowed to collapse. When conquest was inevitable, his choice was not resistance, but reducing the scale of destruction. This was not a glorious choice. It was the kind of choice that later generations would question as serving a new master. He was never fully trusted by the Mongol warriors, nor was he accepted by Chinese scholars. He stood between two worlds, a Khitan exile and a Mongol chancellor at the same time. He was blunt by nature, openly confronting powerful figures at the Mongol court without flinching. But he was no idealist either. When the Mongols continued their western campaigns, he did not oppose the wars themselves. His concern was always what came after, how to keep the conquered world running. If conquest could not be stopped, then making the aftermath livable was the harder task. Yet politics never protects you just because you were right. After Ogedei's death, Empress Torajin seized control of the court and power shifted to her inner circle. The rivals Yelu Chucai had once kept in check saw their opening. Abdal-Rahman returned, reinstated tax farming, and openly challenged Yelu Chucai's authority. Yelu Chucai submitted memorial after memorial in protest, but there was no longer a Khan willing to listen. He went from being the empire's chief advisor to a sidelined old man. In 1243, Yelu Chucai died in obscurity at the age of 53. It was said that when he passed, his household had almost no savings, only rooms full of books and musical instruments. A man who had designed the empire's fiscal system had taken none of its wealth for himself. He never saw a fully institutionalized empire, nor did he live to witness Kublai Khan establish the Yuan dynasty's administrative system decades later. But the census records, tax structures, and administrative frameworks he had fought for laid the foundation for that transformation. He planted the seeds, others harvested the fruit. Yelu Chucai's choice was not unique to him. Throughout human history, every great conquest has produced two kinds of people among the conquered: those who die for the old order and those who try to rebuild rules within the new one. After Rome conquered Greece, Greek scholars entered the Roman system and embedded Greek philosophy and knowledge into the conqueror's empire. During the British colonization of India, a generation of Indian intellectuals chose to push for legal and educational reform within the colonial framework rather than wait for the empire to collapse on its own. After World War II, people in both Japan and Germany rebuilt their nations under the systems imposed by their occupiers. At the time, nearly all of them were called traders or collaborators. But decades later, looking back, it was often these people who kept civilization alive. History celebrates the courage of martyrs, and rightly so. But for a civilization to survive, martyrdom alone is not enough. It also needs another kind of person, someone willing to stand in the wreckage, ask not who is in charge, but whether the rules can still be rebuilt. Yelu Chucai was that kind of person. Losing his homeland did not make him a martyr. It made him a builder of systems. In an age that worshipped conquest, choosing to live for order required a different kind of courage.